Greetings and welcome to another episode of Living the Wiccan Life. As you can see, winter has come to Rossville. Recently, Rossville held its Festival of Lights parade. We were all very impressed that such a small town put on such a great show. It was a wonderful experience. We even had people in the parade go out of their way to wish us a happy solstice. There will always be people who don't like having the witches next door, but overall, people here in Rossville have been very welcoming. And I think that we will be happy here for a long time to come. In this episode, we revisit one of our most fascinating guests, Michelle Belanger, author of the Psychic Vampire Codex and other works on modern vampirism. Although Michelle is speaking about the vampire community, what she has to say is of equal relevance to any subculture that you might think of, including the Wiccan subculture. It's a long interview, but I'm sure you'll enjoy it.
Okay, we're here again with Michelle Belanger, one of our most popular interviews, and like everything else here in Salem, everybody eventually comes through here. And fortunate that Michelle's here. And, well, Michelle's, how'd you get here?
Let me see. I am on tour, partly to support my two new releases, Vampires in Their Own Words and the Psychic Energy Codex. But every year around fall, I tour colleges around the country, and I talk to them about the vampire and gothic subculture. Mostly it's around through like 19th century literature and the vampire and folklore, but we get a little bit into the community, and I was recently asked to come and speak at Salem State. I had a couple of days of hang time, so I wandered over since I was already staying at the Hawthorne here in downtown Salem. I ran across Christian Day, who was putting on the Vampire Ball, who was like, "Oh, you need to come, and then come to the Witches' Ball." So I have been slightly induced by a little bit of arm twisting to hang out with all the fun people here in Salem for 2 days, and then I will be off to Roger Williams University in Bristol, and then to SUNY Medical in upstate New York and Syracuse, and then I'm off on my way to Hollywood for Hex Hollywood. And then I get a couple of days breather.
Wow. Well, it sounds like you're doing colleges, that people are taking the vampire culture, and you have other words for it. Am I pronouncing sanguine culture?
Sanguine. It's vampire subculture is usually what I call it, or just the vampire community.
It's being taken very, sounds like it's being taken very seriously by going to colleges.
I actually get more contact from anthropologists, sociologists, students working on their doctoral theses, because some of them lump it under new religious movements, but others have realized that although it has some beliefs that are part of it, it's a subculture, and you get to actually like watch a culture develop. We're in a really fascinating point in American history where we are no longer really identified by our ethnic origins, by our nationalities. And once the country became so homogenized, humanity kind of like leans toward tribal attitudes. So we have created these artificial but no less real and valid subcultures that are kind of like our little tribes. And the vampire subculture is becoming recognized as one of those.
Can you turn that device over? You're a perfect spot. No, I just want to turn. I just want to make sure.
Not really sure what I'm. Oh, okay. Yeah. Little
make sure
thingy.
That I'm on. Oh, good. I get so nervous about that.
Oh, that's okay. I am a jinx when it comes to electronics anyway.
Well, I've been so jinxed by it because with being all these witches and vampires and things like that. It seems like I've had a lot of battery problems. I have to keep recharging.
I did a paranormal convention just before I came out here called UNIFCon at Paranormal State College, Pennsylvania. And it was about 1,000 various psychics, paranormal workers, ghost hunters, and everything else, and some demonologists just to throw into the mix for good measure. And there were so many random little problems, things getting lost. We watched Lorraine Warren and Father Labar, who was an exorcist from New York City. He was sitting there giving his lecture on demonology and exorcism, and his little water bottle just like went whoop, poof, right off. I mean, just nobody touched it. It just picked itself up and moved off. Electrical problems, battery problems. It was crazy, but kind of fun.
Now, you talked about artificial cultures. Yeah. Well, why would people, I guess the question I get a lot, why would people try to identify something that is so societally or mythologically considered evil?
Well, if you go back to the folklore, vampires are definitely bad. They are kind of the outgrowth and really a personification of society and humans' fear for the dead. A folkloric vampire is really the dead come back from the grave to steal from the living what they don't have anymore. But once it got taken up by fiction and myth and film particularly, it started to change and transform and evolve into a more humanized figure. Until now, the vampire that you see in movies, with the exception of some throwbacks like 30 Days of Night, which recently came out, which kind of goes back to the evil vampire as monster, most vampires really typify the Byronic hero, the outsider who by some quality of himself is outside of society, but also outside of the laws of God and man, and as a result has this power. And his very alienation is the source of his power. There's forbidden sexuality tied up with that. There's the romance of immortal life, eternal youth. And these are all things that are really, although our culture doesn't always obviously worship them, they are things that we really look up to. Everybody wants to be immortal. Everybody wants to be eternally young. All the Botox treatments kind of suggest that that is really an obsession for our culture. So it's been humanized. And Dark Shadows in the 60s was one of the main reasons that vampires turned into something people could identify with. Barnabas was the first reluctant vampire. He was this fellow who was cursed, but he wanted to be part of society. He wanted to be a good guy, and he used his powers for good. So people were able to identify with this mythic archetype in a more positive way. Being here in Salem, what I really see, and it reminds me where the vampire subculture is at. 50 years ago, witches had probably the same question asked of them. Witches make pacts with Satan and sacrifice children in sabbats in the woods, because that was what people knew from the archetype from folklore, from the Malleus Maleficarum and the witch trials. But the witches saw something in the word witch, in the archetype of witch, that really appealed to them. And they went about picking all of the bad stuff out and making sure that they distinguished themselves, modern witches, from the witches of myth. And that's the same process that vampires are going through.
My daughter likes a book series with the heroines Anita Blake.
Oh, Anita Blake with Laurel K. Hamilton. Yeah, she really has capitalized on that whole sexy, forbidden part of the vampire.
And I've noticed there's something called vampire erotica that's really emerging as a
Oh my God. 10 years ago, I'd go to a bookstore and lament the lack of anything except for maybe Bram Stoker's Dracula. And now I go into a bookstore and I'm actually inundated by books on vampirism. The whole vampire craze right now in fiction has created a couple of genres. There's supernatural fiction, where you have our world, only there are supernatural creatures in it. Vampires, werewolves, fairies. Laurel K. Hamilton is one of the people at the head of the list creating this genre. And vampires as bodice ripper romance novels no longer feature Regency heroes, they feature vampires. And a lot of that does also go back to Dark Shadows and its effect on baby boomer girls who were romanced by Barnabas. Anne Rice added to the mix by making her vampire Lestat a rock star, this very sexy figure. And now everybody wants something a little bit different, a lover who is dark and mysterious and kind of untouchable. It's the ultimate fantasy to be romanced by this forbidden demon lover for so many people right now.
Now, there are people who are practicing, who are sincere, who want some of the abilities, some of the ideology. Do you believe that these powers of the vampire represent something that's real, tangible?
In the vampire subculture, we have a continuum of people. On one end, and it's by far the smaller end of the spectrum, you have people who are born vampiric, psychic vampires like myself. The word vampire is relevant because something in our makeup makes us need vital energy. Some of them will take it in the form of blood, small amounts, and they are sanguine vampires from the Latin word sang, which just means blood. But most of them take this just through vital energy, and it's kind of like Reiki attunements in reverse. You are able to reach out and connect to the energy of others. On that aspect, on that end of the spectrum, the community, vampirism is very, very real. And it informs people to a greater or lesser degree in their fashion or their personal identity, but it is something that they live with every day. The most visible part of the vampire subculture that everybody sees, every documentary always wants to pan around the club where everybody's dressed up as vampires with the contacts and the fangs and the capes. Those are mostly what we call lifestylers, and they are people who are romanced by the archetype of the vampire. They love the vampire as it is developed in our culture, and they find something empowering about identifying with that. In some respects, actually for many of them, it's a magical identity. They put their vampire on, and it allows them to find a power inside themselves, a confidence, a sex appeal that they don't ordinarily have. And in many ways I find that appeal exists because our culture has stripped away so much magic in our lives. I mean, we have these dull, drear cubicle existences where we are just little corporate drones. And it's very telling that a lot of people in the vampire lifestyle, especially in the bigger cities, are all corporate people, lawyers, computer programmers, folks who live that cubicle life by day and then really need to find some way to strip that away and let their inner selves out. And they find the vampire as a very potent expression for that. On the darker side of things, anybody can learn to take energy, and there are a couple of darker magical orders that teach vampirism, that teach it as a way to prey upon others and a way to empower the self. They tend to be left-hand path traditions, and they usually actually separate themselves very clearly from the community, which is just fine for us because we don't like kids who can't play nicely in the playground associated with us. We have rules and ethics that we try to follow as a group, from lifestylers to side vamps to sanguines.
And this is like one of the gentlemen who was just recently put in jail because he led a group to murder.
Yeah.
Out of Florida.
Occasionally it can go to that length. There was a young man, Rodney Farrell, who had identified with the vampire, and he is the youngest person on death row in Florida because his beliefs led him, as well I would argue some emotional instability, led him to bludgeon a girl's parents to death with a tire iron brutally. And you almost can't escape stories like that. The only comfort that I can take is generally when people snap, or schizophrenic people who have severe mental illnesses that will lead them to violent crimes like this, they always find some potent kind of mythic archetype to seize upon. There are the mothers who will drown their children because God told them to do it. You know, they were making angels. It can be God, it can be Satan, it can be the vampire. The unwell mind will seize upon something powerful to kind of separate that urge outside of themselves. It's important in the community for us to, first of all, really plug ethical behavior, but also encourage people who are involved in this community to make certain that they're involved for the right reasons, that it's not some sort of psychopathic obsession. We try to police our own. In September of 2006, there was a young man, Kim Veer-Gill, in Montreal who shot up a school, and he was on vampirefreaks.com, which is a fairly controversial website. It's not just devoted to vampires, it's a lot of heavy metal, dark metal, gothic, pretty much anybody who's associated and interested in darker music, aesthetics, and lifestyles. But Gill had really shown that there was something that preceded his behavior. He had had a number of, if you knew what you were looking for, if someone had reached out to him, they probably would have been able to at least stave off his outburst. It was clear he was not well. So we try to keep an eye out for people like that. We try to encourage people to reach out to someone who seems deeply troubled and who's into this just because they can't figure out what's really wrong. And we seriously encourage them to find help. I maintain contact with a couple of psychologists for that reason.
We've seen this with like the psychic community years ago, and before that, like Scientologists. Even they've had this sort of incident even with like Christian communities.
Yeah. Well, the bottom line is people are crazy. Yeah, there's always a small percentage of the population who's crazy, and in any group you're going to find a couple of people who are a little unstable, and one or two that are really truly unstable.
That was part 1 of our program. I hope that you'll join us again for part 2.